The rain has returned to Rome, and so have we. Welcome to part 2 of Hotel Trevi, a story of longing, second chances, and the quiet spaces between words. If you haven't yet heard part 1, I recommend starting there first. It sets the path that brings us to this moment. You'll find the link in the episode description below. But if you're ready, if you're standing where Claire stands now, heart full of questions, rain against the window, breath caught between what was and what might still be, then let us begin. This is where everything lingers, where everything waits. The rain had stopped, but its ghost lingered on the windows. Rome had turned hushed and golden again, lamplight smearing across the wet cobblestones like spilled honey. Claire stood barefoot by the bed, staring out at the city she couldn't seem to leave behind. Her black dress hung on the back of a chair. A glass of water sat untouched on the nightstand. She had taken out her earrings, brushed her teeth, and turned down the sheets. But she hadn't turned off the light. Down the hallway, behind one of the identical doors, Julian waited. Or maybe he didn't. Maybe he'd already slipped into his own bed, content with a night that had ended in suggestion rather than resolution. Maybe he was just as restless as she was, lying with one hand behind his head, staring at the ceiling and replaying the way she'd said, "Not yet." Claire exhaled. She didn't let herself think any further. She pulled on her robe, cinched it tight at her waist, and opened the door. The hallway was quiet, dim, just the low hum of distant elevator machinery and the click of her steps on the tile. She didn't knock at first, just stood there, her hand poised, heart fluttering in her throat like a page trying to turn itself. Then, 3 soft taps. The door opened immediately. No questions, no surprise. Julian stood there in a white undershirt and slacks, his feet bare. The room behind him smelled of warm fabric, leather, and something faintly woody, soap maybe, or cologne from earlier in the evening. His eyes swept over her, not hungrily, but as if trying to memorize. "You sure?" he asked, voice quiet. "No," she said, "but I'm here." He stepped aside. Claire entered slowly, the way you enter a cathedral after dark. Her robe brushed her calves. The door clicked shut behind them. They didn't rush. He didn't reach for her right away. Instead, Julian walked past her to the armchair and picked up a folded blanket, tossed it aside like a formality no longer needed. Claire stood near the bed, one hand resting lightly on the wooden footboard. "You're different tonight," he said. "I'm tired of being careful." He crossed the space between them, measured, calm. His hands found her waist, not with possession, but with care. His fingers rested there for a breath, asking rather than taking. She stepped closer. Her hand slid to his chest, fingers splayed against the thin cotton of his undershirt. Beneath it, his heartbeat thudded in steady rhythm. She tilted her face upward, close enough to feel his breath. Their kiss began softly, a gentle meeting, a remembering. It deepened slowly, like heat through fabric, until she felt herself yielding, something inside her loosening for the first time in months, maybe years. Her robe slipped from her shoulders without resistance, pulling at her feet in silence. She didn't look away. Neither did he. Julian's hands moved with reverence. Her bare back, her hips, the dip of her spine. He touched her, as though he were learning a language with no desire to rush the translation. She responded in kind, her palms finding his arms, his neck, the silver streaks at his temples. She reached for the hem of his shirt, laughing softly when it caught awkwardly on his elbow. He chuckled with her, tugged it over his head and tossed it aside. There was vulnerability in the laughter, but no fear. No need to prove anything. Just the freedom of being fully seen. They made their way to the bed in slow increments, not guided by urgency, but by instinct. Her breath caught when his mouth found the base of her throat, her collarbone. He paused when she gasped, not in hesitation, but in attention. He wanted to get it right. They learned each other by degrees, pressure and pause, rhythm and release. Her body responded to his with a kind of aching recognition, like a song half remembered and suddenly recalled. Their movements weren't flawless. This wasn't choreography. It was two people navigating touch and trust in real time. She shifted beneath him, guided him gently with her hands. He adjusted to her breath, the way she arched, the way she softened under his mouth. And when their bodies finally found the same rhythm, it was unspoken, inevitable. She wrapped her arms around his shoulders, eyes fluttering shut, letting go of the part of her that had held itself together for too long. It wasn't wild, it wasn't hurried. It was slow and real and deeply tender. He kissed her jawline, her cheekbone, her forehead. She whispered his name, not from need, but recognition. And when release came for both of them, it wasn't a storm, but a surrender, a soft, shared exhale into something neither of them had dared to expect. After, they lay tangled in the sheets, the room dim and quiet. Her head rested on his chest, fingers tracing the edge of an old scar just beneath his ribs. He whispered her name once, not in desire, but in gratitude. She heard it in his tone. "Why do you know how to be gentle?" she murmured. Julian didn't answer right away. He reached for the blanket, pulled it over them both. "Because I know what it's like when someone isn't." Claire closed her eyes. For a long time they didn't move. The city outside hummed its low lullaby. The old radiator ticked faintly. His heartbeat moved steadily beneath her cheek. She didn't ask for more, and he didn't offer. But when she stirred sometime later, reaching quietly for her robe, Julian turned toward her, his voice thick with sleep. "Stay," he said. She hesitated, one foot already brushing the floor. "I don't want to wake up alone," he added, almost as if he hadn't meant to say it aloud. Claire looked at him, truly looked. The man who had listened without interruption, who had touched her without demand, who had given her nothing but space and the softness to be herself again. She let go of the robe, slipped back beneath the covers. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. Claire woke alone. The light was different, clearer, sharper, the color of dry stone in memory. Roman morning, unapologetic and cold, poured in through the sheer curtains like a truth long withheld. For a moment she didn't move. The pillow beside her still held the faint impression of Julian's head. The sheets were warm in one spot, already cool in another. She sat up slowly. Her robe lay across the foot of the bed. The room was quiet, untouched except for the small envelope on the nightstand. Claire stared at it. Cream-colored, unsealed, her name written in a hand she hadn't seen before. Distinct, slightly slanted, precise. Not Julian's dinner party handwriting. Something more deliberate, almost archival. She reached for it. Inside was a photograph. Just one, glossy, 4x6. Not new, but not old either. 2, maybe 3 years ago. She recognized herself instantly. Sitting at a cafe table in Trastevere. Her hair was longer then, curled under a beret. She wore a camel coat, one glove off as she cradled an espresso. Her eyes were turned away, watching something beyond the frame. But it was the background that made her blood run cold. Julian. Not looking at the camera, not even facing her directly, just passing by, blurred in motion. A man in a navy overcoat, sunglasses pushed into his hair, reading something on his phone. Unmistakable. Claire gripped the edge of the nightstand. It wasn't just coincidence. It wasn't chance meetings and wine-stained fate. He had seen her before, long before Hotel Trevi, before the fountain, before he even asked her name. The photograph trembled in her fingers. She dressed quickly, each motion brittle with adrenaline. Black jeans, gray sweater, the coat she almost left behind. No makeup, no jewelry. She slipped the photograph into her pocket. The hallway was empty, the elevator slow. Every second buzzed with disbelief and fury and something else, something worse. The echo of this again. Another man with a story that didn't add up. Another romance built on a mission. The concierge smiled at her as she passed. Claire didn't smile back. She didn't know where he'd gone, but something inside her whispered, "Find the garden." The quiet place tucked behind the lobby with its stone benches and rusted fountain and stray cats dozing on the ledges. A place where conversations couldn't be overheard, where endings could happen quietly, and maybe beginnings too, but not this time. She pushed open the door to the courtyard. Julian was there. Sitting on the edge of the fountain, sleeves rolled to his forearms, elbows on his knees. He didn't look surprised to see her. Claire stopped 3 steps in. The sun cut a blade of light across the stones between them. "You left a photograph," she said. He didn't stand, just looked at her. "I wanted you to see it before I explained anything." She pulled it from her pocket and held it up. "You knew me," she said, voice low. "You watched me. That's not some poetic accident. That's surveillance." Julian inhaled through his nose, nodded once. "Yes." The silence cracked between them. "Jesus, Julian," she whispered. "Who are you?" Now he stood. "I never lied," he said. "Not directly. But I didn't tell the whole truth. That's a coward's distinction." He took a step forward. "I was in Rome 2 years ago on assignment. Intelligence consulting for a joint task operation. One of the men we were following was your fiancé." Claire blinked. "What?" Julian's jaw flexed. He looked tired now, older. Not officially, of course, no record. But the company he worked for had fingers in some very dark contracts. Shell accounts, bribery chains. It wasn't about you, Claire, at first. Her arms folded across her chest without meaning to. "But I was in the photo. You remembered me." "I did," he said. "I couldn't forget you." Something broke open in her chest, sharp and stinging. Anger, grief, betrayal. Familiar things wrapped in now something new. Longing. A terrible longing to believe him. "To you I was just a connection," she said. "A lead." "Not for long," he said quietly. "That's why I left it all behind." Claire turned her face. The sunlight hit the photograph in her hand and flared. "I don't know what to do with this," she said. Julian didn't move closer. "I'll leave if you want. Today. You won't see me again." She stared at him, and the man who had made her laugh over cannoli, who had listened when she said her marriage ended quietly, who had touched her as if she were made of something holy. And yet, and still, Claire said nothing, just turned and walked away. The Spanish Steps were almost empty that afternoon. slick with mist from a passing rain, the marble glistening like polished bone. Claire sat near the top, coat pulled tight, her fingers knotted in her lap. Tourists moved below in hushed clusters, umbrellas bobbing like paper lanterns. Rome blurred beneath her, a painting half smeared by water. She had walked for hours, Piazza Navona, Campo de' Fiori, down back alleys that smelled of oranges and smoke. Her thoughts were fractured, snapping backward to the photograph, to Julian's voice, to the bitter taste of something she hadn't expected, loss. Because she wanted to believe him, not just the words, but the space between them, the warmth that lived in his quiet, the way he looked at her like she was still whole. And he had lied, or withheld, which was worse. Strategic silence, a familiar tactic from a past she thought she'd buried, along with the man who'd promised her a life of open windows and honest mornings. Claire stood. She didn't remember deciding to go to his room. Her feet simply carried her there. Hotel Trevi's corridors were warm and dim, lined with sconces and mirrors that reflected too many versions of herself. At his door, she didn't knock. She rapped, sharp, 2 quick bursts. It opened almost instantly. Julian stood in a white dress shirt, sleeves pushed to his elbow again, as if the last conversation had never ended. His face was unreadable, but the air between them pulled tight. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I didn't come to make peace," she said, stepping inside. The room was neat, Spartan, a book on a nightstand, a half-finished espresso on the sill. She turned to face him. "You followed me 2 years ago. You took that photo. And now you're telling me it wasn't about me?" "It wasn't. Not then. But it became about me," she snapped. "And you never said a damn thing." Julian moved closer, slowly. "I tried to walk away from the work, from the lies, but you stayed in my head. And when I saw you again at the fountain, Claire, I didn't plan it. I didn't engineer this. But I couldn't walk past you twice." Her breath hitched. That name, Claire, the way he said it, like a soft vow. "I don't know what any of this is," she said. "I don't know what you are." "I'm the man who hasn't stopped thinking about you," he said, "even when I should have." She looked up at him, anger flickering, but beneath it, something raw, something trembling on the edge of belief. Julian reached into the drawer by the bed and handed her a second envelope. "More secrets?" she said bitterly. "Proof," he said, "that your fiancé wasn't who he said he was, that you were never under investigation, only proximity. I kept the file because I knew you'd need to see it someday." She took it slowly, her fingers brushing his. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of ache, of memory, of what hadn't been said between 2 people who didn't quite know how to let go. Claire stared at him. "You should hate me," Julian said quietly. She stepped closer, the file still in her hand. "I do," she whispered, "just not the right way." Her fingers found his shirt collar. His breath caught. The kiss came like a match strike, sudden, hot, desperate. No music, no poetry, just truth, skin deep and rising. She pressed him back against the wall, and he let her, his hand slipping into her hair, her coat falling somewhere between them. Buttons, heat, mouths remembering things they never should have known. He didn't ask if she was sure. She didn't ask what it meant. It was the kind of closeness built not on trust, but on need. The need to feel something real in a city built on illusions. The need to burn away the fog, to taste something unfiltered. Later, when the sheets had cooled and their bodies lay quiet in the hush of regret and want, Julian turned to her. "I meant every word," he said, "even if none of them were enough." Claire stared at the ceiling. "I don't forgive you," she said softly. "I know." She rolled to her side, her back to him. "But I'm still here." He didn't touch her, but he didn't leave either. Morning in Rome was a soft ache. Light spilled through the shutters in silver blades, dust floating like memory in the air. Claire sat on the edge of the bed, her dress wrinkled at her feet. Julian asleep behind her, one arm curled to where she had lain, as if even in sleep he reached. She hadn't slept, not really. The file sat on the nightstand, open, read twice. Her name appeared in 2 places, peripheral, meaningless. Her ex-fiancé had been running cash through art sales, paintings swapped in galleries she'd never entered. Julian had been part of the investigative team, and he'd seen her once walking through a market in Trastevere, a woman in the background of a photo. That had been the beginning. Not surveillance, obsession. Claire touched the edge of the file again. The truth lay there, dry and clinical. But the truth didn't account for the way he had looked at her when she whispered his name, or the way her body still hummed where he had touched her, or how something inside her had felt less alone for the first time in years. She dressed quietly. Outside, the streets hummed awake, vendors lifting shutters, scooters whining, birds calling across rooftops. Claire stood by the window and watched Rome yawn into another day. Behind her, Julian stirred. "You're leaving?" he said, his voice low with sleep. "I have to," she replied without turning. He sat up slowly. The sheet slipped from his chest. "Where?" "I don't know," she said. "Just not here. Not yet." She turned to face him. His hair was tousled, eyes unreadable. There was no anger in him, just the silence of a man who'd expected this all along. "I don't regret last night," she said, "but it doesn't fix what you didn't tell me." He nodded. "I know." Claire stepped closer, her fingers brushing the frame of the doorway. "I don't want to disappear," she added, "but I need to remember who I was before all of this, before you." Julian rose and crossed to her, barefoot on the cool tile. He didn't touch her, just stood close enough that the heat between them flared again. "I'll be here," he said, "for as long as it makes sense." She smiled, but it was a tired thing. "You're a spy, Julian. Nothing about you makes sense." He grinned faintly. "Then we finally agree on something." Claire leaned up, kissed him once, soft and full of things left unsaid. Then she was gone. Down the stairwell, out into the Roman light, past the fountain where the tourists already tossed coins and made promises they wouldn't keep. She didn't look back, not even once. Epilogue, 1 week later. Claire sat at a cafe in Montmartre, the kind with chipped teacups and an old gramophone in the window. Paris was colder than Rome, but the air felt cleaner in her lungs. She opened her notebook. On the first page she wrote a name, Julian March, then drew a line through it. Below she wrote the title of a new story, The Man at the Fountain. She didn't know how it would end, but for the first time in years she wanted to find out. The pen moved again. It began with a photograph, and a man who shouldn't have mattered. But sometimes, in cities built of ruins and rain, we find the person who reminds us we're still alive. She looked up. The sky over Paris was a soft, impossible blue. In the hush that followed, with Rome bathed in the gold of its own silence, Claire and Julian found no need for promises, no declarations, just the nearness of breath and the warmth of being understood. Not every story ends with certainty. Some end with stillness, with two people choosing to stay, if only for one night more. and sometimes that's enough. Thank you for joining us for Hotel Trevi, a story of rediscovery, of softness after silence, of love that doesn't arrive loudly, but waits to be found. If this story stirred something in you, we'd love to know. Leave a comment, share it with someone who might need it, and stay connected. Because some places and some people stay with you long after the story fades. Until next time, buona notte.